It's my penultimate day in Croatia, and I've just driven 2 hours from Rijeka into a world where vast landscapes meet vivid green hues. The north certainly doesn't disappoint and catches the eye, but of course it wouldn't surprise you to hear that even here I was chasing a hidden gem. Some distance from the main roads I'd found myself drawn to a small lonely chapel. I'd spotted it online, the only remains of a village abandoned in 1981. Upon arriving at the former religious site, I thought it had been damaged by an earthquake. However, upon further investigation, it turns out that the original town had been devastated by flash floods and landslides. It's no surprise because I was greeted with storm after storm just a week prior upon arriving at this site. Before its destruction, the town had about 180 inhabitants who lived in 25 households, but today the chapel is all that has stood the test of time. Today we shall dive into the art of photographing in tight spaces, transforming challenges into opportunities. Okay, welcome to this week's video. And in this week's video, as the intro suggested, we're going to be talking about photographing in tight spaces. And when I say tight spaces, in the form of this tiny little chapel over my shoulder here. Not only is it a tight space, it's also incredibly difficult to line up because nothing in here is straight at all. It's probably been damaged by an earthquake at some point in its life, and it makes photographing things really challenging. So in this week's video, that is the topic. Let's try and give you some ideas on photographing in tight locations. Things to do with your tripod, settings, angles, and of course, lens choice. Let's do this. First of all then, let's talk a little bit about the location and our tripod. Now for me, this is a really tight little environment. So the thing I want to be doing is I want to be taking up less real estate with my tripod. Now my tripod is like a standard 6-foot tripod, so 180 centimeter tripod. And realistically, I don't want it to be this wide. So with the legs, in their natural position, the usual position, they're taking up a lot of space on the floor. And that's difficult then to get into tight spaces. So the first thing I'm going to suggest would be to get those legs nice and narrow. And I mean like push them right together, don't be frightened of it falling over. Of course it's a nice solid tripod even if those legs are pushed together. Just make sure that when you do so, it's nice and straight like so. Now wherever I move in this little room now, this is going to give me a much smaller space to work with and of course help me get into those smaller spaces. So that's the first thing. One more thing about the tripod, of course, is I've then got the ability to be able to use the center column and not. Now, because I've pushed the legs a bit closer together, to start with, I'm not going to opt for that, but there might be the ability to do that at some point if I need to at a stretch. But of course, it's giving it less and less stability the higher I put this thing. So I'm going to try and keep it like this just for now. Okay, so the next tip that I'm going to give you is about where I'm positioning myself. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just keep these doors open, but I'm going to actually close them just a little bit. So I still want light to come into the space, but I don't want them to be taking up the entire corner. And the reason for that is I want to utilize as much of this space as possible because my shot selection is going to be slightly angled. Now, the reason why I'm choosing an angled shot and not a traditional kind of one-point perspective, something that I do, of course, a lot on this channel, is because the building is a little bit off. Like, not a little bit, it's way off. There's just lines and it's bent and it's just, basically, it's been hit by an earthquake at some point in its life, like I mentioned. So you can imagine. But going into the corner then and pushing a shot towards one side of it is going to kind of help us to kind of really take away from the fact that the architecture is a little bit off and a little bit crooked. So pushing the doors to, I don't want to go completely closed because I still need natural light to flow into this dark dingy hole, and I still want to be able to kind of, you know, realistically get nice clean shots with lower ISOs. So that's the next thing. I'm just going to do that with the other door as well on the other side, and I think then we're ready to shoot. Okay, so the other door is now the similar position. And the reason why I want to do both doors is realistically because I want to be able to put my tripod either side. I don't know which angle is going to work best at the moment, so that's what I've opted to do. One corner or the other, but not the straight on. That's what we're going to do. Now, this is pretty much a one-shot place, a bit of a one-shot wonder. We could get a ceiling shot if we wanted to, but for the purpose of this video, realistically today, it's just going to be about nailing that one shot and giving you tips on how to do so. Make sure you get the best you can in these tight spaces. Tripod being close together, of course, now allows me to get really close to the wall, and that's what I'm doing. Now, I don't know what my composition is going to be yet until I, of course, turn on my camera, flip out my LCD and angle things up. And that leads me nicely on to my actual gear because, of course, as usual, I've opted for the Canon R5 and this time a 17mm tilt shift. You don't need a tilt shift, but this is going to give me the ability to have a nice wide shot, 17mm, but 11.5mm of height because I'm going to do a panoramic top, middle and bottom. And I need to utilize all of that if possible. But for you, you could use something like, if you've not got a tilt shift lens or the ability to use one, then you want to utilize something like an 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, those kind of millimeter lenses. Nice and wide and get yourself a nice shot. If I didn't have this, I would probably opt for a nice 11mm lens and go for a landscape orientation shot and do it like so. I would lose a little bit of ceiling height and I'd get quite a lot of flooring, but I'd make sure that I get this tripod up nice and high into the middle of the room where possible and try to pull in more of that ceiling and a little bit less foreground. That's what I would do if I didn't have this lens. But with this lens, it does give me a little bit more wiggle room. So here we go. Let's try and get this on and try and line up a shot. Okay, so like I said, I'm not sure exactly what this is going to look like. Flick this on. The problem I've got is there is some door in here, and I'm just going to check through my focal length to see kind of how much of this I'm getting in my shot. And to be honest with you, it's not a lot of the ceiling, so I probably am going to have to use this center column. So I'm going to just push back as far as I can, watching these horrible cobwebs, and I'm going to pull this up as far as possible. Now, when I do that, of course, I'm losing stability on the tripod, like I mentioned, and realistically, I've got to be careful. I'm going to show you in this camera what it is that I'm doing. Again, as usual, it's very difficult for me to film in these tight spaces. So let's flick the video mode and show you what we've got here. That's where we're at so far, which is quite a lot. Now you can see here, actually, there's a bit of this door in the image. So I'm going to have to close this just a little bit more until it's out of my frame, just to give me the full field of view. So now, there we are now. I'm just going to kind of move in position where I can. Now, I think what I want to do is I don't want I want to watch the edges of my frame. So, you know, basically here, I want to watch the edges of this, and I want to line something up like so. Now, for me, I think that's fairly decent at the top. There is a piece of ceiling detail that I want in my framing, and I actually want it on the left-hand side, and I want to include all of that. So I'm making sure to include it, and you can kind of see that just there in my detail. So that's the top of my frame. And then when I go through the frame like so, that's going to be the middle. Of course, you can see me filming just there. And then when I come back down to the bottom, this is going to be the bottom of the frame just down here. Of course, I'm going to move you out of the way. And that's pretty much that. So I think that's not far off. Now, from this point, I can just tweak my composition. I can just move like so and really just try and get the angle where I want it. So the next tips that I'm going to give you on this is going to be relating to the camera itself. You should really learn every single element and button position of your camera. Where is each setting? Which button it is? And I don't just mean by looking at it. I mean, you know distinctively. And the reason for that is I'm always tight in these kind of positions, locked against the back wall here. It's very difficult to see my buttons. I've lined up my composition so I don't want to move it, and I'm having to operate the camera with just my hand going around the back of it and moving all the settings around. The settings that I've put in here are nice and simple. I've raised my ISO a little bit, and the reason for that is I've got my center column up, my tripod's in this high position. I don't want any vibration in here, so I've boosted the ISO up to 400, which actually, to be honest with you, is also fine on the Canon R5. 3 brackets are activated, and that's the bit that, of course, is difficult to reach around the back of the buttons, and I've managed to do that here. Now, the next thing you want to make sure, of course, as well, is that you're utilising your in-camera spirit level. It goes without saying, in those tight spaces as well, that can also help you out. I'm fairly happy. So that just leaves me to move you out of my way to get my shot. Okay, so that leads me on to the final point then, really. If you're in these tight spaces, squashed in against the back wall, and you're utilising the full width of a wide angle lens or a tilt shift as I am today, you're going to watch still for distortion in your images. And I've actually just done another shot where I've stepped away a little bit from the back wall just to kind of really try and angle myself a little bit more towards that altar and get it more in the centre of the frame to kind of eliminate some of that kind of, you know, distortion on the very far edges of the lens. That's all for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, bye-bye for now. Let's get out of here. I'm not done. I've got more videos to produce here on this trip. See you soon.